Welcome to the Forever Love Podcast. I'm your host and relationship coach, Lily Mtongwiza. And today I thought it would be fun to share with you some of the highlights from this past weekend at our Advanced Boundaries workshop. Now, I love doing workshops because it gives me an opportunity to share and teach the coaching tools that I use within the context of your real life situations. Sometimes it can be hard to understand the coaching tools without the context. So this past weekend, I had an opportunity to chat with over 20 women, and they shared their real life situations, and we used the coaching tools to work through them to better understand boundaries and relationships. And in this episode, you're going to get an opportunity to hear some of the highlights that we talked about during the workshop. Please enjoy. And I'm curious, why sacrifice? We're going to talk a little bit about that today because sacrifice sounds like such a nice word. It's so Christian-y, right? I think there's a better way. And hear me out here, because I know that it's going to sound sacrilegious when I say this, but I believe that oftentimes what we call sacrifice isn't as sacrificial as we say it is. I think when we really are like what we see as a sacrifice to the person who is doing it authentically, it is their true desire to them. They aren't really sacrificing. It is what they ultimately want to do. It is coming from a place of desire. I think a lot of times we sacrifice from a place of thinking we have to or because we think we should in order to please somebody. And those sacrifices often they don't really honor God because they're not being given from a generous and joyful heart. They're being given to get something. And so it becomes less of a sacrifice and more of an exchange of value. If you give this to me, then I'm going to give that to you. Boundaries are about creating a situation in which when you personally know your boundaries, and when somebody comes into that space, that your sacred space, your bubble, whether that's your emotional bubble or your time bubble or your physical bubble, then you're informing them that they have crossed a boundary, and you're asking them and telling them, I would like you to leave, and if you don't. So boundaries really follow this very simple formula of if you do X, I will do Y. If you do this thing that is violating my boundary, I will do this reaction. And I want to encourage you to think of your reaction less reactively. I want you to respond to a boundary violation with love. And this is hard because we get really defensive when people are in our space, right? We get our dukes up, we get shoulders back, ready to fight often. And we don't want to come from that energy. We want to come from that place of love. See, because our thoughts always end up in our outcomes. That's why I like to imagine that all of our thoughts are seeds. And the emotions fuel the growth of that, and then they bear fruit, and we get the outcome. So when you think they don't love me enough, we end up creating a situation in which we don't love ourselves enough. We don't treat ourselves with kindness. We get really clenched up. We eat more than we need to. We have conversations that don't go anywhere. So we end up like hurting ourselves because of somebody else's behavior. Okay, so I want to address two things that you kind of talked about. First, with your first situation, you had a boundary that you did not uphold.
Right.
So you had a legit boundary violation, but it's kind of like if you had a neighbor and for a really long time, you let your neighbor come in whenever they wanted, and they didn't have to knock, and they were always at your house. But then one day you decided, you know what, this is my house and I don't want you to come in all of the time.
Right.
Please make sure you knock, and I'll unlock the door if I want you to come in.
Right.
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 And so now so for a long time, you have a history of, they didn't even know there was a boundary violation. They thought it was fine. Right. Because that's the way the relationship was for a long time. And so suddenly they're like, oh, okay, I didn't know it was a big deal. But now that you've told me, I'm going to try to respect your boundary. Right. Now, they've agreed to your boundary. We both agree this is reasonable. But the next day, come over to your house and they open the door like they always do. And you're like, hey, come on in. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Exactly.
You at that point have not followed through on your boundary.
Exactly.
See how that happens?
I do.
And it's so tempting because we're in this pattern and this is what we always do. But if you're going to set the boundary, it's your responsibility to uphold it. So when your neighbor continues to walk through, you've now created an idle threat. So we want to be very, very mindful of, if we're going to set a boundary and we're going to go through the process of telling the other person, and same with like Amy. So if you said, when you're deceptive, I'm going to end the relationship, and then you go, and I'm not saying you would do this, but like, if you said that was what the consequence is going to be, and then, you get lonely at night and you're like, hey, I'll just see what he's doing on Instagram. And then, we'll just send him a little DM. And then, it wouldn't be so bad if we had a cup of coffee. We could see how things are going. You see how you've now created an idle threat. You haven't honored your boundary, and therefore they have no reason to honor your boundary either. Now, of course, you want to, put your best foot forward and stuff. But the idea is that we show up authentically, wrinkles and weight and issues and all. We bring all of it and say, hey, would you like to get to know me? Because I'd like to get to know you. Here's what I'd love. Wouldn't it be great if we did this, we did that, we worshiped God together, we had a family together? Like, what are the possibilities? Do you like that dream? Here's what I'm forecasting. Here's what I'd love for my life to look like in the next 5-10 years. We're kind of like giving a presentation of, here's what's amazing about my vision for the future. Would you like to be a part of that? Can you tell me about your vision for the future? Let's see if we have matching values and matching wants. Do we want the same kinds of things in our lives or not? And if we're in that dating container where it's just like curiosity and sending the right signals to let people know this is what I'm interested in, then we're creating authentic relationships. Then once we're like, yeah, that you seem cool, I'm cool, I want that, you want that, cool. Now we can move into courtship. And here's an idea that I want to share with you ladies of a 90-day courtship relationship. Here's a fun idea. When you're dating, here's a suggestion. Ask people if they would like to court you for 90 days. What would happen if we create this container of like, let's bring our authentic selves and be in a courtship relationship for the next 90 days? And so we're going to bring all of ourselves. We're going to go all in, but here are the boundaries around it. Here's here are my boundaries. I want to go all in with these boundaries. I'm going to bring my whole self, my real life. I'm going to show up authentically, and I'm going to communicate my boundaries effectively. And I'm going to tell you like, hey, if you cross this line, we're done. But assuming we don't violate each other's boundaries, let's court towards the idea of marriage for 90 days. And at the end of the 90 days, let's have a conversation and decide where we want to go from here. Do we want to court for longer? Do we want to end the relationship because we found out we don't share the same values? Because I think a lot of times we get stuck like constantly having to decide over and over and over and over and over again. And it's exhausting. And we miss the opportunity to have a relationship because we're so busy deciding whether or not we want to have a relationship. So a lot of us have a tendency to see yellow flags all over the place and think that they're red flags. And this comes from past trauma. When we've been in situations where we've gotten hurt, we are looking for those things. Our brain is hypersensitive to keeping us safe, which is exactly what a brain should do. Your brain is designed by God to keep you safe, to keep you alive, to keep you comfortable, to keep you in community. And so it is going to focus on your survival, not thriving. Your brain does not care if you thrive. You care if you thrive, but your biological brain is not designed for you to thrive. It is designed for you to survive. And this is an important difference. Your brain does not care about your ultimate destiny. Your brain is not concerned with eternity. Your brain is concerned with staying alive today. Okay? And in the Old Testament, a relationship with God was in alignment with survival. Let's stay alive. Let's worship God so that we don't have to die from famines and pestilence and invading armies. It lined up very nicely. But then Jesus comes and he kind of flips the script and he says, listen, survival is no longer the objective of your life. You can lose this body, but you have an eternal life to live. And so Jesus says, stop worrying about the things that are of this world. Start focusing on your eternal life. But our brain is not like, oh, now I'm a Christian brain. No. This is why we need to adopt the mind of Christ. We need to begin to think like Christ so that we can act like Christ. You cannot act like Christ if you don't think like Christ. If you act like Christ from a place of fear, you end up acting like a hypocrite because it's all coming from this like, oh, I'm scared place. To act like Christ, you have to love like Christ. You have to think like Christ. You have to look at your situation, not from your perspective in this moment, trying to survive the situation, but in light of eternity. So noticing how those thoughts are affecting you. Like, oh, when I think this thought, like really put those thoughts into the life code. When I think this thought, it makes me feel super jealous. And when I'm feeling jealous, I act crazy. I do all these things that are just not true to who I want to be. And the outcome is I drive myself crazy and it's not even true.
Yeah.
So really evaluating and recognizing, what is this thought doing? And does it serve me to continue to let it play in my brain? And if it does not, we want to take those thoughts captive and surrender them to Christ. And then when your brain offers them back up, we want to be disciplined to be like, brain, I notice that you're thinking that thought. We're gonna not. I want to direct my brain towards the truth. The truth is that I don't want to be with this guy.
Yeah.
The truth is my friend does not want to be with this guy. The truth is I want to have an authentic relationship with him that is not romantic. And keep redirecting. Just because your brain goes down a certain path doesn't mean we just keep following it. I like to imagine that brains naturally by default are like puppies. And they're puppies that want to smell the stinkiest things in their environment. They just want to go smell fire poles and hydrants and other disgusting things, dead squirrels. That's where your puppy brain wants to go. And it is your job to continually, not to follow the puppy around and be like, yay, all the things. This is what puppies naturally do. Let's embrace it. No, you are trying to train a disciple. Like, imagine it's your job to train that puppy to be a seeing eye dog. You don't let it just wander off and follow it down the gutters to wherever it's going. Your job is to disciple, to train that puppy. Be like, come back. Here's the path we're going to. And there's nothing wrong with the fact that a puppy does puppy things. There's nothing wrong with the fact that a brain does brainy things, but we don't follow it down there. We keep bringing it back and saying, no, you have a job to do. Your job is to serve me. And I'm going this way. I've got an eternal destiny. I've got a God-given desire to pursue. And so your job is to serve me. And you're going to think the way I tell you to think. And I'm going to continue to discipline my brain and say, there's nothing wrong. That's my natural tendency. But I am maturing into this person, and the person I want to be thinks like this. And I practice that thought the same way you would practice for a test. And you think those thoughts over and over and over again until that becomes the natural tendency of your brain.
All right, my friend, I hope you've enjoyed today's highlights from the Boundaries Workshop. If you would like to purchase a recording of the entire workshop, please send me a DM. You can find me on Instagram at Lily Mtongwiza, LILYMTONGWIZA. It has been a pleasure to share parts of this workshop with you, and I can't wait to do another one. If you have a suggestion on what you would like to workshop on, let me know. Send me a DM and we'll connect and we'll set it up, because I love to interact with my students in this way, and I would love to hear your ideas on what we should workshop next. That's all for today. Until next time, God bless you.